So let's give some functionality to that first button we have, the use button. Not every item can be used. Sometimes we want to have an item that we just need in our inventory to progress parts of the story, but there's not actually anything we can do by clicking the use button. So we need to add a boolean to decide whether it can per item. So let's go to blueprints, instructs, and sitem data, and we need to add a boolean, and we'll call it can be used. We want the default to be true, because I feel like more items will be able to be used than not. And to test this out, I want to be able to use our flashlight battery, but not our door key. So let's go into our blueprints, actors, inventory, and we'll have to open the master item to compile it. Close it again. And we can open our flashlight, and can be used as checked because we made that the default. But in door key, let's uncheck it, so we cannot use it. So let's go to our W inventory dropdown widget, and in the construct, we need to cast to our player to get a reference. So cast to L1 character. Object is get player character, and we will promote this to a variable. We'll call this player ref. And we need a custom event. And delete these two things. And we'll call this custom event update menu, because we need to update whether we have which buttons we have out of these three. So we'll just get the input slot. It'll be of type W inventory slot, since this is a per item basis. And we will get the slot's index, and we need to promote the index to a variable. And we'll just call it slot index. Next, we can just get the player reference and get the BPC inventory. And we can call our function that we made item get item data at index. And the index will be our slot index. It's the same thing as just plugging it in right from here. And we want to get the class defaults from the item. And we can break this. And we have this boolean can be used. So we can, the reason we made the size boxes variables is so we can just hide the whole section instead of having to worry about hiding the button and the text and anything else you might want to put inside the section. So we'll just get the use section, and we will get a set visibility, plug that in, and we'll just use a select node, and can be used will be the index. If we can use it, we want it to be non-hit testable, because we don't want the we want it to be self only, not self and all children, because if it was self and all children, we wouldn't be able to hit the button. And if we cannot use it, we want it to be collapsed. This is a great example of when to use collapsed versus hidden. If we were to set it to hidden, it would become invisible, but it would not delete the layout space that it's taking up. As you can see, if we toggle the eyeball right here, that changes it to collapsed, and we can see how these go up to the top. If it was invisible, we would just suddenly not be able to see it. If I toggle the, oh no, that doesn't work. Oh well. It would suddenly become invisible, but there would still be this space here, and we don't want that space there. So let's go back to our W inventory menu, and in our open drop-down menu, custom event at the end here. Before we set the visibility, just because we have to do more updates, I'm just going to take this W inventory drop-down, and I'm going to plug it in like that. I'm going to have to break the link to the first one, just to clean it up a bit. And before we set it to visible, we just want to update the menu. And this slot will be the slot from our custom event input. So compile and save, and we can now test if it works. So for these flashlight batteries, they can be used to set to true. I'm going to pick them up. And for these door keys, they're set to false. Pick some of those up. So when we click on our flashlight battery, our use is still there. Now if we click on our door key, the use is gone. It is only examine and drop. And that's exactly what we want. Alright, so we got it working whether it should show up or not. Now for when it does show up, we want to actually be able to do something with that button. So we need to open our BP inventory item master. And we need to make a custom event, and we'll call this use item. And that's all we need to do there. And we can open our flashlight battery and open full blueprint editor. And we can now call the use item event. So event use item. And we can print a string, and we can say that in this one we've used a battery. So this is great because after this use item event in any one of our inventory items, this is where we choose what that specific item does. There's one thing I forgot. In our inventory drop-down menu, we need to get all our buttons here, these three, and we need to scroll down and set is focusable to false. This way we'll still be able to click them when we open our menu, since in our inventory menu, when we set the user focus to the close drop-down menu button, this will allow us to continue to be able to press the buttons. So now we can press these, and we can still click off. Alright, so let's plug in our use item event in our BPC inventory, which I still have open, but let's navigate toward it anyway. So content, blueprints, blueprint components, and BPC inventory. So in our BPC inventory, we need to make a function, and we'll call it use item as well. And we need an input type integer, and it is our index. And we'll create a local variable from this. We'll call this local index. And then we can just drag in our get item data at index, and this will be our index. And then we can get actor of class, and from this return value we can call the use item event. And this way we'll be able to just call use item from BPC inventory, and it'll find our correct item and run through that specific event. But this actually currently won't work because our actual inventory items, are not spawned into our world, so get actor of class will return none. So instead of dragging and dropping each inventory item into the world, because it's tedious, so we might forget to do it as we add new inventory items, let's have our code do that for us. So after get actor of class, we should ask if it's valid. So it is valid, and we'll get the macro, plug that to our execution. And if it is valid, we can just continue to the use item. If not, we want to spawn it into the world. And this is a great way of doing it because it'll make sure it'll only spawn everything once. So we can spawn actor from class. And the class we want is this item that we're getting the data from. And for spawn transform, we can just right click and split it, and that'll set everything to 0. So it'll spawn it right in the center of our world. And there's nothing physical in our inventory items because they're not the same as the pickup actors. So there's nothing to physically interact with when they are spawned. After that, we can call use item again. It's the same as this one. And that's all we need to do for now. So let's go back into our inventory dropdown, click on our button, scroll down, and we want a on released. And with the player refs BPC inventory, we can call the use item function. Now the function we're calling here is the one from our BPC inventory, not to be confused with the use item that are specific to each inventory item. So we're calling this function. And the index is our slot index, and that's why we made it a variable in the update menu. So now we can actually test it out. Before we do, let me just run you through the path real quick, because it might have gotten it kind of confusing. So we click on this use button, and with our player ref, it calls the use item function at the correct slot index. So it knows which index we are clicking on, and it transfers that to our use item function. In our use item function, we get the data at that index, so we can figure out what item it is with this function we made already. And we just get the item, and we do some extra code here, and we call the use item event. And the use item event is something that we can change for each item. So in our flashlight battery, all it does is call use battery, and if our door key actually could be used, we could add something for this as well. So like event use item, we could print a string, and we'll just call it used battery. To test it, we can actually just select this can be used, and we'll say the door key can be used for now. Oh, I just realized I typed used battery here. We want it to say used door key. So we can test it out. And we could pick these up. I can click here, and if I hit use, it prints a string use battery, and then all the stamina. Don't worry about that. And then with door key, we now see used. Because we set the can be used boolean to true, and it says use door key. Use battery, use door key. Great. So in these events is where you'll set everything you want for how to use certain items. Eventually we'll replace this use battery string with actually giving our flashlight more power in the future. Lastly, after we use the item, we need to remove that item from our inventory. So in our BPC inventory, we can add a function. We'll call it remove item. And we need an input of the index, so it knows which item to remove. And we just need to call get item data at index. And we need to ask if the amount is greater than 1. If that's false, so if it's not greater than 1, if there's only 1 left, we can set the array element. Inventory slots is target array. Our index is our index. Could make a local variable for this, but it's up to you. And then we can split the item data, and we'll leave this blank. And we want this to become null because there was only 1 left, and we removed the last one. If the amount is greater than 1, though, and we only want to remove 1 from it, we can, once again, set the array element, copy and paste, with the index as the index. Our item is the same as our item data here, and the amount is this amount minus 1. After both these paths, we want to update the inventory slot, so we can just drag that in. And the index from the index, we probably should have made a local variable just to clean things up, but it gets the same job done. And then we could go back into use item, this one right here. And in the beginning, we can just check that the amount is greater than 0 to make sure we can actually remove something. And at the end, we can just call remove item from both. And we can just do it like that. I also want the drop-down menu to close when we use an item. So in the begin play of our BBC inventory, we just, after we cast to this player controller, we just want to get the reference to our inventory menu. Because if you remember, we set a reference to this widget in our player controller, and we can just set this as a variable in here as well. So we'll call it W inventory menu ref, and then at the end of use item, after we remove an item, we can just call the event close drop down menu. So it'll close once we use the item. So we can test that out by hitting play. Let's grab some items and see how it says 8 right here. Once we use an item, it should say flashlight battery used or whatever we put at the top left. And it removed one. We are now at 7. We can continue to use. And now that we have one left, it completely removes our item. We can no longer interact with this slot. It's become disabled, and the item has been set to null. Works the same with these battery door keys here. I'm sorry, even though we need to set the door keys back to cannot be used. And every time we click use, the drop-down menu has disappeared, and so has the invisible giant button. Great. And that is how we set up the use button. We'll obviously be coming back to this a bit in the future so we can actually add some use functionality to our flashlight instead of just printing a string. And in our door key, let's just go ahead and check can be used back to false.